My husband's funeral had ended just 2 hours ago, but the vultures were already circling. I stood in the driveway clutching the flag they had folded off Elijah's casket when I heard the sound that made my blood freeze. Metal grinding against metal, a chainsaw ripping through iron. I ran to the backyard, my black heels sinking into the grass. There was Kyle, my son-in-law, standing there with a pair of massive bolt cutters hacking away at the chains of Elijah's old garage. The one place my husband had forbidden anyone to enter for 40 years. My daughter Tasha stood behind him holding a trash bag and looking at her shoes. I screamed for him to stop, but Kyle just looked over his shoulder, sweat dripping down his face, and smirked. He said, "Ma'am B, don't make a scene. Elijah is dead. This junk pile needs to be cleared out because I have already taken a deposit on the land. You are going into the nursing home tomorrow morning, so let's not make this difficult." My name is Bernice Washington, and this is how my dead husband and I taught my greedy son-in-law a lesson that cost him his freedom. Before we continue, please leave a comment telling us where you are watching from and subscribe to the Never Too Old channel. We are creating a community of people who know that our best chapters can happen at any age. Now back to the story. The dirt on Elijah's grave wasn't even dry yet. I was sitting in the living room staring at his photo on the mantel, holding my rosary so tight my knuckles were white. The house was too quiet. 40 years of marriage and suddenly silence. Then came that screeching noise from the backyard. Cring. It sounded like a wounded animal. I moved faster than I had in years. I burst through the back door and there he was. Kyle. He was attacking the heavy padlocks on the garage door like a madman. Tasha was standing there, useless as always, clutching a box of contractor bags. "Get away from that door!" I shouted, my voice booming across the yard. "That is Elijah's property." Kyle didn't even flinch. He snapped the last link of the chain and threw the cutters onto the concrete. He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand and gave me that look he always reserved for me. The look that said I was just an uneducated old woman standing in the way of his brilliance. "The property is sold, Bernice," he said, dropping the respectful title he usually faked. "I spoke to the developers this morning. This land is worth more than your entire life's work. We are selling it. I have arranged a room for you at Shady Pines. The van comes at 8 a.m. The audacity took my breath away. He had sold my land before my husband was even cold. He had booked me a room in a facility where people go to die. I walked right up to him. I am 68 years old, but I have lifted engine blocks and scrubbed grease out of concrete for 4 decades. I grabbed those bolt cutters from the ground and held them like a weapon. "You get off my property, Kyle," I said, my voice low and dangerous. I scrubbed floors on my knees to buy this land when it was nothing but a swamp. I balanced the books for Elijah's shop every night until my eyes burned so Tasha could have braces and college tuition. "This is my home, and you are trespassing." Kyle laughed. It was a cold, ugly sound. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick yellow envelope. He tossed it at my feet. It landed in the dirt with a heavy thud. "You think you own this place? Pick it up," he sneered. "Read it and weep, old woman. Elijah didn't own anything when he died. He mortgaged this garage and the land to me 6 months ago. He borrowed $200,000 for a business deal that went bad. That is his signature on the deed. You have 48 hours to pay me back the full amount or the sheriff comes to evict you." I stared at the envelope in the dirt. The world tilted on its axis. Elijah never borrowed money. He hated debt. He paid cash for everything, even his trucks. I looked at Tasha. She was crying now, big silent tears, but she wouldn't look at me. She was looking at Kyle with terror in her eyes. "Tasha," I said, my voice trembling, "did you know about this?" She finally looked up. Her makeup was running, ruining the expensive face she put on for the funeral. "Mom, please," she whispered. "Kyle made some bad investments. He owes people money. Scary people. Dad wanted to help. He signed the papers to help us. Just sell the land, Mom. Please. Then come live with us. I'll take care of you." I looked at my daughter, the girl I had braided hair for, the girl I had walked to school. And I realized I didn't know her at all. She was weak. She was letting this man destroy her parents' legacy because she was too afraid to stand up to him. I picked up the envelope. I didn't open it. I just looked at Kyle. "Get out," I said. Kyle stepped closer, invading my personal space. "You have 48 hours, Bernice. If I don't have the cash or the deed. By Sunday noon, I am bulldozing this garage with everything inside it, and you will be sleeping under a bridge. Come on, Tasha." He grabbed my daughter's arm and dragged her toward the gate. I stood there in the twilight, clutching the envelope, watching the only family I had left drive away. That night was the longest of my life. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold tea. I opened the envelope. The document looked official. A loan agreement. $200,000. And at the bottom, Elijah's signature. It looked real. The slant of the E, the loop of the H. But my heart knew it was a lie. Elijah would have sold his own kidney before he put a lien on this property. This garage wasn't just a building. It was his sanctuary. He kept it locked for 40 years. He never let me in, never let Tasha in. He said it was dangerous. He said it was full of old parts and chemicals. Why would he sign it away to a man he despised? A noise at the living room window made me jump. A scraping sound. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept behind the door. I wasn't going to let Kyle scare me in my own house. I crept into the living room, bat raised. The window slid open. A leg came through. I swung the bat back, ready to strike. "Grandma, don't hit me." I froze. A boy tumbled onto the carpet and looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. It was Jordan, my 14-year-old grandson. He was wearing his black hoodie and carrying a backpack that looked heavy. "Jordan," I lowered the bat. "What are you doing here?" Your father said. "I know what he said," Jordan whispered, standing up and dusting off his knees. He looked so much like Elijah in that moment. The same serious brow, the same quiet intensity. He locked me in my room, but I climbed out the window. I had to come. He walked over to me and took the bat from my shaking hands. He led me to the sofa and made me sit down. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a smartphone. "Grandpa didn't borrow that money." "Grandma," he said, his voice cracking with anger. "He didn't sign that paper because he wanted to help Dad. He signed it because Dad forced him to." "What do you mean, forced?" Jordan tapped the screen of his phone. "I was in the back seat of the car that day. Dad didn't know I was awake. I heard them arguing. Dad told Grandpa that if he didn't sign the loan papers so Dad could show them to his creditors, he would take me away. He said he would move us to a different state and Grandpa would never see me again." I gasped, covering my mouth. Blackmail. He used my grandson as leverage. Grandpa was crying. Jordan said, tears welling in his own eyes. He signed it to keep me here. But he told me something later. He whispered it to me when Dad wasn't looking. "What did he say, baby?" "He said if anything happened to him, I had to tell you to open the garage. He said the truth is in the oil can. The garage. The forbidden place." Jordan looked at me. "We have to go in there, Grandma. Tonight. Before Dad comes back with the bulldozers." I stood up. My grief was gone, replaced by a cold, hard fury. I went to the kitchen drawer and pulled out the false bottom where Elijah kept his secret keys. I had found them only yesterday while cleaning. A single, heavy iron key on a ring. "Let's go," I said. We walked out into the night. The air was thick and humid. The chains on the garage door were broken where Kyle had cut them, but the heavy deadbolt was still engaged. My hands were shaking as I slid the iron key into the lock. It turned with a heavy clunk. I grabbed the handle and heaved the heavy sliding door open. It groaned on rusty tracks. I expected to see piles of junk, old tires, rusted engine blocks. That's what Elijah always said was in there. That's what Kyle called it, scrap metal. I clicked on my flashlight and swept the beam across the darkness. I didn't scream, but the breath left my body in a rush. It wasn't junk. Sitting there in the darkness, gleaming under the dust covers, were shapes I recognized from magazines. I walked forward and pulled the tarp off the first one. Chrome sparkled in the flashlight beam. Red paint, deep as blood. A 1967 Chevy Impala restored to absolute perfection. Beside it, a Shelby Mustang. Behind that, a Dodge Charger. 4 cars. Muscle cars. Vintage. Immaculate. Jordan let out a low whistle. "Grandma," he whispered, "do you know what these are? These aren't just cars. This is a fortune. I walked to the workbench in the corner. It was tidy, organized, and there, sitting on a shelf between 2 cans of motor oil, was a leather-bound journal. The oil can. I opened it. Elijah's handwriting filled the pages. "My dearest Bernice," it began. "If you are reading this, Kyle has probably tried to take everything. I knew this day might come. He thinks I'm a fool. He thinks I'm just a mechanic. But I have been building this for you. These cars are your retirement. They are Jordan's future. But there is more. Look under the spare tire of the Impala. I hired a private investigator 6 months ago. I know what Kyle is really doing." I looked at Jordan. He was already moving toward the red Impala. He popped the trunk. He lifted the carpet. There was a black briefcase tucked into the spare tire well. Jordan pulled it out and set it on the workbench. It was locked with a combination. "Try your birthday," I said. "Elijah loved you more than anything." Jordan spun the dials. 0412. Click. The case popped open. Inside were photographs, bank statements, and a digital voice recorder. Jordan picked up a document and his eyes went wide. "Grandma, this isn't just debt. Dad isn't just broke. He's laundering money." Suddenly a red light blinked on the dashboard of the Impala. Beep, beep, beep. Jordan froze. He looked at the car, then at me, his face pale in the flashlight beam. "Grandma, that's a GPS tracker. It just activated. The system woke up when we opened the trunk." He looked at his phone. "Dad's phone is linked to this car. He just got a notification. He knows we are in here." From the front of the house, I heard the sound of tires screeching on asphalt. Headlights swept across the driveway, illuminating the open garage door. "He's here," Jordan whispered. I grabbed the briefcase. I grabbed the journal. "Lock the door!" I shouted, but it was too late. Heavy footsteps pounded on the pavement. Kyle burst into the garage, his face twisted in a mask of rage I had never seen before. And he wasn't alone. Behind him was the county sheriff, a man I had known for 20 years, a man who played poker with Kyle every Friday night. And beside the sheriff was a man in a cheap suit holding a clipboard. "Well, well," Kyle sneered, stepping into the light. "Look at what we have here. Breaking and entering into seized property. Sheriff, arrest her." The sheriff stepped forward, his hand on his holster. "Bernice Washington, you are under arrest for theft of collateral assets." Jordan stepped in front of me, spreading his arms. "No, you can't." Kyle didn't even hesitate. He backhanded his own son across the face. The sound was like a gunshot. Jordan hit the concrete hard and didn't move. I screamed. I raised the heavy journal to strike, but the sheriff grabbed my arm and twisted it behind my back. Pain shot through my shoulder. "Cuff her," Kyle said, walking over to the Impala and running his hand lovingly over the hood. "And get that brat out of here. I have an auction to organize. These beauties are going to the highest bidder on Sunday morning." He looked at me helpless in the sheriff's grip and smiled. "You should have gone to the nursing home when I asked nicely, Ma'am B. Now you are going to jail." To be continued. I pushed myself up from the dirt, ignoring the sharp pain radiating from my hip. My Sunday dress was ruined, stained with the soil my husband and I had turned from a dumping ground into a home. But I did not care about the dress. I cared about the disrespect. I stood to my full height, brushing the dust from my hands, and fixed my eyes on the 2 hired men standing behind Kyle with their saws and bolt cutters. They were young, looking at their boots, ashamed to be caught in the middle of a family war. "You pack your tools," I said, my voice steady and cold as the grave. "You pack them right now, and you get off my property before I call the sheriff. I know your mothers, and I know they did not raise you to help a man assault a widow on the day of her husband's funeral." The men looked at Kyle, then at me. They saw the steel in my spine. Without a word, they lowered their tools, turned around, and walked toward their truck. Kyle screamed at them to stay to finish the job, but they ignored him. In this neighborhood, Ma'am B still commanded respect, even if her son-in-law did not think so. I turned my gaze to Tasha, my daughter, my own flesh and blood. She was trembling, clutching a tissue, but she wasn't moving toward me to help me stand or to ask if I was injured. She was reaching for Kyle, her hands hovering anxiously over his arm. "Kyle, honey, are you okay?" she whimpered. "I am so sorry. Mom is just upset. She does not mean it." The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. She was apologizing to the man who had just shoved her mother into the dirt. She was siding with the wolf against the shepherd. Kyle pushed Tasha's hand away. His face changed. The red flush of anger faded, replaced by something far more terrifying. A slow, arrogant smile spread across his face. He adjusted his collar and smoothed down his jacket. He looked at me, not with rage, but with pity, the kind of pity you have for an animal that does not know it is already in the trap. "You are right, Bernice," he said, his voice dropping to a smooth, terrifying calm. "I do not need those men to cut the lock. I do not need to use force. I have something much stronger than bolt cutters." He reached into the inside pocket of his blazer. He pulled out a folded document, the paper crisp and white against the gloom of the evening. He did not hand it to me. He threw it. It fluttered through the air and landed in the mud at my feet. "Pick it up," he commanded. I did not move. "Pick it up and look at your hero's legacy," he sneered. "You think Elijah was a saint? You think he was a brilliant businessman? That piece of paper says otherwise." I looked down. The document was a promissory note, a loan agreement. The numbers were bold and black. "Elijah mortgaged this garage and this land to me 6 months ago," Kyle said, stepping closer, looming over me. "He borrowed $200,000 to cover bad debts. He put everything up as collateral." He pointed a finger at the bottom of the page. "That is his signature, Bernice, verified and notarized. He sold you out, and since he is dead and the term is up, the debt falls to you. You have exactly 48 hours to pay me $200,000 in cash. If you don't, I foreclose on the property. You pay up or you get out of my house." I looked down at the document lying in the mud. My hands shook as I brushed the dirt off Elijah's signature. It was real. I knew the way his hand trembled after 40 years of turning wrenches. I turned to Tasha. She was still hovering near Kyle, looking like a frightened child instead of a grown woman. "Tasha, look at me. Did you know about this?" She tried to look away, but I stepped closer, forcing her to see the betrayal in my eyes. "Did you know your husband bullied your father into signing this?" "Mom, please," she sobbed, wringing her hands. "Kyle is in trouble, real trouble. He said if Dad didn't help, we would lose everything. He said he would leave me. I didn't have a choice. You didn't have a choice. You chose a man who cuts locks at a funeral over the father who worked double shifts to buy your prom dress. You stood there and watched him break your father's spirit." My hand moved before I could stop it. The sound of the slap echoed through the yard, sharp and terrible. It wasn't a slap of anger. It was a slap of grief. My palms stung, but the pain in my chest was worse. Tasha gasped, holding her cheek, staring at me in shock. "Get out," I whispered. "Get off my land. I don't have a daughter right now. I have a stranger standing in my yard." Kyle grabbed Tasha by the arm, pulling her back roughly. "You heard her, babe. Let's go. We will be back on Sunday with the sheriff to throw her out. Enjoy your last 2 nights, Bernice." Tick-tock. I watched their taillights fade into the darkness. Then I was alone. The silence of the house was heavy, suffocating. I sat in Elijah's recliner in the dark, clutching that dirty piece of paper. I had 48 hours to find $200,000 or lose the only home I had ever known. I felt old. I felt tired. For the first time in my life, I felt like giving up. Then a sound cut through the gloom. Scritch, scritch. Someone was trying to pry open the living room window. My sadness evaporated, replaced by the cold instinct to survive. I wasn't going down without a fight. I grabbed Elijah's old baseball bat from the umbrella stand and crept toward the window. The sash slid up. A leg appeared. I raised the bat, ready to swing at Kyle or whoever he had sent to scare me. "Don't swing, Grandma." I froze. The voice was a whisper, urgent and terrified. A boy tumbled onto the rug. It was Jordan, my grandson. He looked at me with wide, tear-filled eyes, shaking like a leaf. "Jordan, what are you doing here?" He scrambled to his feet and grabbed my hand. "Grandma, you have to listen. Grandpa didn't borrow that money. He didn't sign that paper because of debt. Dad made him sign it because of a video. He was blackmailing him." Jordan reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a heavy, tarnished brass key. He pressed it into my palm, his fingers warm against my cold skin. "Grandpa gave me this 3 months ago," he whispered. "He said to keep it hidden until the right time. He said if you ever felt like you had nothing left, this key would remind us who we really are. I looked at the key. It looked ancient, like something that belonged to a castle, not a garage. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. We stepped out into the backyard. The night air was thick with crickets and the distant hum of the highway. The garage stood there like a tomb, dark and silent. Kyle had cut the padlock chains earlier, but the main deadbolt, the one Elijah had installed himself, was still intact. My hands shook as I slid the brass key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, heavy click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet night. I grabbed the handle and heaved. The door groaned, sliding upward on tracks that hadn't been greased in years. The smell hit me first. Not the smell of rot or rust like Kyle had claimed. It was the smell of motor oil leather and high-octane gasoline. It was the smell of Elijah. I clicked on the heavy-duty flashlight I had grabbed from the kitchen. The beam cut through the darkness, dancing over dust motes swirling in the stagnant air. I expected to see piles of scrap metal. Old tires. Maybe a rusted frame or two. I didn't expect the chrome. The light caught a bumper and flared, blinding me for a second. I moved the beam higher. Sitting there under a layer of dust, but unmistakable in its glory, was a 1967 Shelby GT500. Its paint was a deep midnight blue with white racing stripes that looked ready to leap off the metal. I gasped, stumbling back. My hand brushed against something else. I swung the light to the left. A cherry-red 1964 Chevy Impala, low and wide and menacingly beautiful. To the right, a Dodge Charger that looked like it had just rolled off the assembly line. There were 4 of them, 4 pristine, fully restored vintage muscle cars sleeping in the dark. This wasn't a junkyard. It was a museum. I walked toward the Shelby, my fingers trembling as I touched the cold metal of the hood. Elijah. All those nights he spent out here, all those weekends he said he was just tinkering with junk. He wasn't tinkering. He was building a legacy. He was building a fortune right under our noses. Jordan was beside me, his face illuminated by the blue glow of his smartphone screen. He was typing furiously, scanning the VIN number on the Shelby's dashboard. He stopped typing. He looked up at me, and his eyes were wide saucers of disbelief. "Grandma!" he whispered, his voice shaking. "Dad said this was all scrap metal worth maybe a few $100. He turned the phone screen toward me. "This Shelby alone, just this one car, the auction estimate is $250,000. He ran over to the Impala, then the Charger, tapping away. "Grandma, the total here. It is over $1 million. Grandpa wasn't poor. He was sitting on a gold mine. $1 million. The words hung in the stale air of the garage like smoke. I looked at the gleaming chrome of the cars, then at my grandson, whose face was pale in the flashlight beam. Elijah had been sitting on a fortune, yet he wore the same grease-stained coveralls for 10 years. Why? Why hide this? Why let Kyle humiliate him with a fake debt when he could have sold one of these cars and silenced him forever? The answer had to be here. Elijah never did anything without a plan. I walked over to his workbench. It was his altar, the place where he performed his miracles on metal and engines. Every wrench was hung in size order. Every bolt was sorted in glass jars. My eyes landed on the top shelf on a row of vintage oil cans he collected. They were dusty except for one, a blue Valvoline can on the end. The lid was slightly askew. I reached up and took it down. It didn't slosh. It thudded. A solid, heavy weight shifting inside. My heart started beating a rhythm against my ribs that hurt. I pried the metal lid off with my fingernails. Inside, wrapped in a clean red shop rag, was a black leather notebook. Jordan came to my side. "What is it, Grandma?" "It is his logbook," I whispered, but not for cars. I sat on his stool, the leather cracked and familiar, and opened the book. The pages weren't filled with mileage or part numbers. They were filled with Elijah's tight, angry handwriting, dates, times, conversations. It was a record of a war I didn't know he was fighting. March 12th, the entry read, "Kyle came to the shop today. He didn't ask for money this time. He demanded I sign the lien papers. He needs to show his loan sharks he has assets. I told him to go to hell." I turned the page. The handwriting was shaky here, like he had written it, while his hands were trembling with rage. March 14th, he came back. He didn't threaten me. He threatened Jordan. I gasped, clutching the book. Jordan leaned in, reading over my shoulder. He told me he is moving Tasha and the boy to Anchorage if I don't sign. He said he will cut all contact. He said Bernice will never see her grandson graduate. He said we will die alone in this house without ever hearing Jordan's voice again. I cannot let that happen. Bernice would not survive it. I signed the papers. I let the devil win to save my family. Tears blurred my vision. I looked at Jordan. He was the reason. Elijah had swallowed his pride, destroyed his own name, and signed a lie just to keep his grandson close to us. He had sacrificed his dignity so I wouldn't lose my heart. I wiped my eyes. Sorrow was for later. Right now I needed ammunition, and Elijah, bless his stubborn soul, had left it for me. I flipped to the very last page, dated just 3 days before he died. The ink was dark, pressed hard into the paper. He thinks I am a stupid old mechanic, Elijah wrote. He thinks he owns me now. But I have been busy. I hired a man from the city, a private investigator. I know where the money is really going. I know about the shell companies. If I die, do not trust the local police. Kyle owns them. The real proof, the evidence that will send him to federal prison for the rest of his miserable life, is hidden inside the spare tire of the red Impala. We moved toward the cherry red Impala like we were approaching a bomb. The car sat low on its haunches, a sleeping beast of chrome and steel that Elijah had polished until it shone like a mirror. I ran my hand over the cold metal of the trunk. My husband had a flair for the dramatic, but hiding his life insurance inside a vintage tire was a new level of genius even for him. Jordan popped the latch, and the trunk lid swung open with a smooth hydraulic hiss. Inside the spare tire sat nestled in its well, looking innocent enough, but I knew better. Elijah never did anything halfway. I grabbed a heavy-duty box cutter from the workbench. My hands were steady now. The fear had burned away, leaving only a cold, hard determination to finish what my husband started. I handed the knife to Jordan. "You do it, baby. You have got the steady hands." Jordan nodded, his jaw set tight. He climbed into the trunk, knees pressing into the carpet, and dug the blade into the sidewall of the spare tire. The rubber resisted for a moment, then gave way with a thick tearing sound. He sawed through the tough material, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool night air. He reached inside the hollowed-out rubber and pulled out a thick, waterproof package wrapped in heavy plastic. We set it on the workbench and cut the tape. Inside was a leather portfolio bulging with papers. I opened it, and my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just a few bank statements. It was a full dossier. Photographs of Kyle meeting with men who looked like they broke legs for a living. Copies of wire transfers going to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. And most damning of all, internal documents from Kyle's old real estate firm showing millions of dollars in missing escrow funds. Jordan picked up a stack of papers, his eyes scanning the numbers rapidly. "Grandma, look at this. These aren't loans. This is embezzlement. Dad has been stealing client deposits for years. He is laundering money through a fake construction company. This is federal prison time. This is 20 years minimum." I stared at the papers. This was why Kyle was so desperate. This was why he needed to sell my land immediately. He wasn't just in debt. He was trying to fill a hole he had dug with stolen money before the authorities found out. He was drowning, and he was willing to stand on my neck to keep his head above water. "We have him," I whispered. "We have everything we need to bury him." I reached for the portfolio to close it, ready to march straight to the FBI, but Jordan grabbed my wrist. His grip was tight, painful. He wasn't looking at the papers anymore. He was staring at the underside of the trunk lid right where the latch mechanism locked into place. A tiny red light was blinking. Pulse, pulse, pulse. "What is that?" I asked, my voice rising in panic. Jordan scrambled out of the trunk, his face draining of all color. He dropped to his knees and looked under the chassis of the car. He pulled out his phone and swiped the screen furiously. "Oh no," he breathed. "Oh God, no." He looked up at me, and I saw terror in his eyes that made my blood run cold. "It is a GPS tracker, Grandma. Passive activation. It turns on when the trunk is opened or the car is moved. It sends an immediate alert to the owner's phone." He scrambled to his feet, grabbing my arm. "Dad put it here to track Grandpa. He just got the notification. He knows we are in the garage. He knows we found the car. He is coming, Grandma. He is coming right now." The sound of tires tearing up my front lawn shattered the night. It wasn't just one car, it was a convoy. Headlights sliced through the open garage door, blinding us, turning the dust motes into a wall of white fire. Jordan grabbed my arm, terrified, but I pushed him behind me. I grabbed a heavy steel wrench from the workbench. If they wanted a war, they had walked into the right garage. Footsteps pounded on the concrete. Fast, aggressive. Then Kyle stepped into the light. He wasn't wearing his funeral suit anymore. He was wearing jeans and a leather jacket, looking like a man who came to do dirty work. And he wasn't alone. Sheriff Miller walked in right behind him, his hand resting casually on his holster, a look of bored annoyance on his face. Flanking them was a man I didn't know, a weasel in a cheap suit holding a briefcase like a shield. "Well, look at this." Kyle spat his eyes, darting from the cut-open spare tire to the briefcase on the bench. "Caught red-handed. Sheriff, I told you. She is stripping the assets. She is destroying the collateral." Sheriff Miller stepped forward, tipping his hat but not smiling. Bernice put down the wrench. "Kyle called me, said he got an alert that the vehicles were being tampered with. You know you can't touch these cars. They are part of the lien." I didn't lower the wrench. I pointed it straight at Kyle's chest. "He is lying, Sheriff!" I shouted, my voice echoing off the steel walls. "There is no lien. He blackmailed Elijah, and right here in this briefcase is proof that your friend Kyle is a thief and a liar." Kyle laughed, but it sounded nervous. "Proof? You mean the stolen documents you just hacked out of my car?" "That is theft, Bernice. That is destruction of property. And frankly, nobody cares what a senile old woman thinks she found." He nodded to the weasel in the suit. The lawyer stepped forward, avoiding the oil stains on the floor with exaggerated care. He didn't look at me. He looked at the garage door frame. He pulled a bright orange sticker from his jacket and slapped it onto the metal. The sound was like a slap to the face. "Mrs. Washington," he said, his voice dry and devoid of soul. "My name is Mr. Henderson, representing Mr. Kyle Vance. This is an emergency court order granted by Judge Reynolds 20 minutes ago. Due to the attempted destruction of collateral, this property is hereby seized and sealed effective immediately." He turned to me, extending a greedy hand. "You have two choices, ma'am. Hand over the keys to the vehicles and vacate the premises right now, or Sheriff Miller will arrest you for grand larceny and destruction of secured assets. The choice is yours, but the handcuffs are ready." I tightened my grip on the heavy steel wrench, my heart pounding against my ribs like a sledgehammer. I was not going to let them take Elijah's legacy without a fight. I stepped forward, ready to swing at the man who had tormented my family. But before I could move, Jordan stepped in front of me. He held the brass key up his hand, trembling, but his chin held high. He looked at his father with a mixture of fear and defiance that broke my heart. "You are a liar," Dad Jordan said, his voice cracking but loud enough to echo off the metal walls. "Grandpa did not owe you anything. You stole from him. And now you are trying to steal from Grandma." Kyle's face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. He didn't speak. He lunged. He snatched the key from Jordan's hand with a violence that made me gasp. Then he did something unforgivable. He raised his hand and struck his own son across the face. The sound was sickening, a wet slap that seemed to freeze time. Jordan crumpled to the concrete, clutching his cheek, a cry of pain escaping his lips. I screamed, a raw animal sound that tore from my throat. I dropped the wrench and fell to my knees beside him, wrapping my arms around his shaking body. "Don't you touch him!" I shrieked, shielding him with my own body. "You monster! He is your son!" I looked up at the doorway, desperate for help. Tasha was standing there. She had followed them in. She saw it. She saw her husband strike her child. I waited for her to scream, to run to him, to fight like a mother should. But she did nothing. She stood frozen in the shadows, her hands covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. But she did not move. She looked at Kyle, then at Jordan, bleeding on the floor, and she stayed silent. She chose her fear of him over her love for us. That silence hurt more than the slap. It was the final nail in the coffin of the daughter I thought I knew. Sheriff Miller shifted uncomfortably, looking at his boots, but he didn't intervene. He just put his hand on his belt and sighed. "Bernice, don't make this worse," he mumbled. "Just let it go." Kyle stood over us, breathing hard, the brass key clutched in his fist like a trophy. He looked at Jordan with disgust, then at me. He raised his hand again, stepping closer, his shadow falling over us. "Stop!" I yelled, holding up my hands in surrender. The fight drained out of me as I felt Jordan flinch against my chest. I could not let him get hurt again. Not for cars, not for money, not for anything. "Stop it, Kyle. You win. Take them. Take the keys. Take the garage. Just leave him alone." Kyle lowered his hand slowly. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He jingled the keys in front of my face, the sound mocking me in the silence. "Smart choice, Ma'am B," he sneered. "I knew you would see reason eventually." He turned to the lawyer and the sheriff. "Lock it up, boys. We have inventory to process." He looked back at me, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "Get some sleep, Bernice. You are going to need it. Because Sunday morning, right here in this driveway, I am holding an auction. I am going to sell every single one of Elijah's precious cars to the highest bidder. And I want you in the front row. Wear your Sunday best. I want you to watch everything he built disappear." I pressed a bag of frozen peas against the purple welt rising on Jordan's cheek, my hands trembling with a rage I had not felt since I was a young woman. We were prisoners in my own home. Outside, 2 men in black t-shirts stood at the end of the driveway, arms crossed, watching the windows. Kyle called them security guards to protect the assets. I knew what they were. They were jailers. He had trapped us in here until the auction on Sunday morning to make sure we didn't call for help or damage the merchandise. "Does it hurt, baby?" I asked softly, brushing hair from his forehead. Jordan didn't flinch. He just shook his head, his eyes fixed on the old, heavy laptop he had dragged out from under Elijah's bed. It was a brick of a machine running an operating system that belonged in a museum, but Jordan treated it like a treasure chest. "I am okay, Grandma," he muttered, his fingers flying across the clunky keyboard. "I just need this to boot up." When he hit me, when I fell, I had my phone cloner in my pocket. It was scanning for Bluetooth signals. I got close enough. I got his mirror image. I didn't understand the technology, but I understood the look in his eye. It was the same look Elijah had when he was fixing an engine that everyone else said was dead. The laptop groaned and whirred the fans spinning loudly in the quiet room. A progress bar crawled across the screen. We sat there in the dark for hours watching the percentage climb. 90%. 95. 100. The screen flickered and changed. Suddenly, we weren't looking at a blank desktop. We were looking at the digital soul of my son-in-law. Emails, bank apps, text messages, everything from Kyle's phone was now right in front of us. Jordan clicked on a folder labeled Finances. It wasn't a ledger, it was a crime scene. Wire transfers to accounts I couldn't pronounce. Large cash deposits that didn't make sense for a real estate agent. But it was the emails that made my stomach turn. They weren't from banks. They were from men with names like Viper and the Ghost. Kyle wasn't just in debt, Grandma Jordan whispered, his face illuminated by the ghostly blue light. He is washing money. He is moving cash for a cartel. He clicked on the messaging app. The most recent conversation was at the top. It was from a blocked number. Jordan opened it, and the air left the room. It was a photo. A photo of Kyle standing in my driveway earlier that night. And below it, a text message that had been sent just 10 minutes ago. The text read, "You have until noon on Sunday. If the money isn't in the account by the time the church bells ring, we don't want the cars. We want blood. We will start with your son." I stared at the screen, reading the words over and over. "We will start with your son." They weren't threatening Kyle. They were threatening Jordan. My grandson's life was the collateral for his father's sins. Kyle wasn't selling the cars to get rich. He was selling them to buy his son's life back from the monsters he had invited into our world. And we had less than 48 hours before the deadline. I stared at that text message until the words blurred, but the terror remained crystal clear. "We will start with your son." They meant Jordan. My grandson was the payment Kyle had promised if the money didn't come through. I looked at Jordan, his face bruised and pale in the laptop's glow, and I knew I couldn't wait for Sunday. I couldn't wait for the police who were already in Kyle's pocket. I needed an army, and I needed one now. I crept into the hallway, moving like a ghost in my own house. Kyle had taken our cell phones. He had stationed his goons outside. But in his arrogance, he had forgotten one thing: the old landline phone in the kitchen. It was a beige relic mounted on the wall, the kind with a curly cord that stretched across the room. Elijah had kept it because he said cell towers go down, but copper wire is forever. I prayed he was right. I lifted the receiver. The dial tone hummed in my ear, sweet and steady. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years, but my fingers remembered the pattern. It rang once, twice. Then a gruff, sleepy voice answered. "Yeah, it's Bernice Washington," I whispered. There was a pause, then the sound of rustling like someone sitting up quickly in bed. "Ma'am B, is everything all right?" It was Big Mike, Elijah's oldest friend. They had served in Vietnam together, turned wrenches together for 40 years. "Mike, I need you to listen carefully," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "The Impala needs a blood transfusion." Silence on the line. Total, heavy silence. That was the code. Elijah had come up with it decades ago, a signal for the crew that meant life or death trouble, bring everything you have. Where Mike asked, his voice wasn't sleepy anymore. It was hard. My driveway, Sunday morning. Bring the whole shop. Consider it done, Ma'am B. Sit tight. The cavalry is coming. I hung up the phone, my hand shaking as I replaced the receiver. I had just summoned a dozen of the toughest, most loyal men in the county. Men who treated Elijah like a brother and me like a queen. Kyle had hired thugs. I had called in family. The phone rang immediately under my hand. I jumped, nearly dropping it. Had Kyle heard me? Was he calling to mock me? I hesitated, then lifted it slowly. "Hello, Bernice. This is Samuel Blackwood." I nearly collapsed against the wall. Samuel Blackwood, Elijah's real lawyer, the one Kyle thought had retired to Florida years ago, the one who held the only copy of Elijah's true will. "Samuel," I gasped. "Oh, thank God. Kyle is here. He has a fake lien. He is selling everything." I know Samuel said, his voice crisp and urgent. "I got an alert from the county clerk's office when they filed the emergency seizure order. It's fraudulent, Bernice. Elijah filed a contingency deed with me 5 years ago. It specifically blocks any sale of the property without your direct witnessed consent in my presence." He paused, and I could hear the roar of an engine in the background. "Listen to me, Bernice. Do not sign anything. Do not let them intimidate you. I just landed at the airport. I am in a rental car right now, and I am driving straight to your house. I am bringing the original will, the deed, and a federal cease and desist order." He lowered his voice. "And Bernice, I am bringing something else." Elijah left a specific instruction for this exact scenario. He called it the nuclear option. "I am bringing the bomb. Just hold the line until I get there." Sunday morning rose over my driveway, but it didn't bring the peace of the Lord. It brought a circus. Kyle had been busy while we were locked inside. He had transformed my front yard into a stage for his grand performance. He had rented a white tent, set up folding chairs, and even hired a catering truck that smelled of roasted pork, trying to mask the stench of his betrayal. He had invited everyone. Pastor Jenkins was there, clutching his Bible and looking confused. Mrs. Higgins from next door was there, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. And mixed in with my neighbors were men I did not know, men in sharp suits and dark sunglasses who didn't look like car collectors. They looked like executioners waiting for the guillotine to drop. "Get in the chair," Bernice, Kyle hissed, shoving a wheelchair at me in the hallway. "I don't need a wheelchair," I spat back. "I walked into this house on my own 2 feet 40 years ago, and I can walk out of it." "It is not a request," he said, gripping my arm hard enough to bruise. "It is part of the show. You are the frail, confused old widow who needs her son-in-law to take over. If you walk out there standing tall, it ruins the narrative. Sit down." I sat, not because I was weak, but because I needed him to think he had won. He wheeled me out onto the porch, pausing to let the neighbors see. He adjusted the blanket over my legs with a tenderness that made my skin crawl. "Look at her," he announced to the crowd, his voice thick with fake emotion. "My poor mother-in-law. The dementia has taken so much from her, she doesn't even know what day it is. That is why we have to sell the collection, to pay for the 24-hour care she deserves." A murmur of sympathy rippled through the crowd. Tasha stood by the refreshments, head bowed, unable to meet anyone's gaze. She knew the truth, but her silence was buying her safety. Kyle wheeled me down the ramp he had hastily installed over my stairs. He parked me right in front of the 4 cars which were lined up like cattle ready for slaughter. The red Impala gleamed in the sunlight, a silent witness to the crime. I sat there gripping the armrests, scanning the crowd. Where were they? Where was Big Mike? Where was Samuel? The driveway was full of enemies and dupes. I felt a cold knot of panic in my stomach. Had Kyle intercepted the call? Was I truly alone? Kyle clapped his hands, drawing all eyes to him. All right, folks, let's get this started. We have the paperwork right here to transfer the titles. As soon as Ma'am B signs the release, we can begin the bidding. He walked over to me holding a clipboard and a pen. He knelt down so he was eye level with me. To the crowd, it looked like a loving moment between family. He smiled a wide, benevolent grin that didn't reach his shark-dead eyes. He placed the pen in my hand and leaned in close, brushing a kiss against my cheek. But when he spoke, his voice was a razor-blade whisper only I could hear. Sign the papers, old woman. Right now. Or I swear to God, Jordan is going to have a tragic accident. He is up in his room right now. It would be so easy for him to trip and fall down the stairs. A broken neck happened so fast. I froze. The pen hovered over the paper. Do it, Kyle hissed, still smiling for the cameras. Sign it, or you bury your grandson next to your husband. I held the microphone with both hands, letting them tremble violently. It was not hard to fake. The rage vibrating inside my bones felt enough like fear to fool the devil himself. I looked out at the sea of faces gathered on my lawn. My neighbors, people I had fed peach cobbler to at church picnics, people Elijah had fixed cars for on Christmas Eve for free when they couldn't pay. They looked back at me with wet, pitying eyes, shaking their heads at the tragedy of getting old. They bought it. They bought the wheelchair, the lap blanket, the silence. They thought they were watching a funeral for my mind. Kyle patted my shoulder, a heavy, condescending weight that made my skin crawl. Go ahead, Mom, he said, his voice amplified by the massive speakers he had set up to announce the auction. Say a few words. Tell everyone how grateful you are that we are handling this burden for you. Tell them thank you. I lowered my head, staring at the silver mesh of the microphone grill. I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. I was not praying. I was watching the attic window of the main house. It was just visible over the top of the white party tent. Jordan was up there. He had crawled through the ventilation shafts while Kyle was distracted setting up his stage. My grandson, the boy they thought they had beaten into submission, was right now wiring his laptop into the Bluetooth receiver for the main sound system. He told me to wait for the signal. A green light. Speak up, Bernice, Kyle whispered, leaning in close, his breath hot and smelling of mints against my ear. Don't make me hurt him. You know I will. I took a shuddering breath, letting a sob catch in my throat. I raised the microphone to my lips. I want to thank my family, I stammered, my voice cracking perfectly. Good, Kyle murmured, squeezing my shoulder. Keep going. I want to thank them for showing me exactly who they are. My eyes snapped up to the attic window. There it was. A bright, steady green light flashing 3 times against the glass. The system was overridden. The audio feed was ours. The trembling in my hands stopped instantly. I gripped the microphone tight, not like a lifeline, but like a gavel. I sat up straight, my spine snapping into alignment. I looked Kyle dead in the eye, and the smirk slid off his face like grease off a hot pan. He saw something in my eyes that terrified him. He saw sanity. He saw strength. He saw Ma'am B. I reached down and grabbed the corner of the plaid blanket covering my legs. With one sharp motion, I ripped it away and threw it onto the dirt. I do not need this blanket, Kyle, I said, my voice booming through the speakers, strong and clear as a church bell. And I do not need your charity. Gasps rippled through the crowd. People stepped back, whispering. Tasha dropped her cup of punch, the red liquid splashing onto her shoes. What are you doing? Kyle hissed, reaching for the mic, panic flaring in his eyes. Sit down. You are making a scene. I stood up. I rose from that wheelchair slow and steady like a queen rising from her throne. I towered over him, fueled by 40 years of hard labor and 5 days of pure fury. "Thank you, son-in-law," I said, my voice thundering across the lawn, silencing the birds in the trees. "You wanted a show. You wanted everyone to hear the truth. Well, open your ears." I raised my hand high in the air, looked straight at the attic window, and snapped my fingers. The snap of my fingers triggered the speakers like a gunshot. For a split second, the only sound was the static hiss of the massive audio system Kyle had set up to broadcast his triumph. Then a voice boomed across the lawn loud enough to rattle the windows of the house. It wasn't my voice. It was Kyle's. But it wasn't the smooth, polite tone he used in public. This was the voice of a man who thought he was a god speaking to a peasant. "Sign the paper, old man." The recording snarled, distortion crackling at the edges, but every word crystal clear. "Sign it right now, or I swear you will never see Jordan again. I will move him so far away you won't even know what time zone he is in." The crowd gasped as one. People looked around confused, searching for the source. Kyle froze his hand, half reaching for the microphone I still clutched. His face went the color of old ash. The recording continued, merciless and loud. "Do you think I care about your legacy, Elijah? Those cars are just metal. I am going to sell every single piece of scrap in this garage. I am going to take the cash, dump your wife in the cheapest state facility I can find, and erase you from this family." Tasha dropped the pitcher of lemonade she was holding. It shattered on the pavement ice and yellow liquid, exploding outward, but no one looked at her. Every eye was fixed on the man standing next to me, the man who had just been exposed as a monster. But Jordan wasn't done. There was a click, and a new audio file began to play. This one sounded different, tinny, like it was recorded over a phone line. "Relax, Viper." Kyle's voice said, arrogant and laughing, "It is a done deal. The old man is dead. The wife is senile. I have the auction set for Sunday. As soon as the wire hits my account, I am on a plane to Mexico. Tasha, please. That woman is so desperate for love, she will believe anything I tell her. I am leaving her with the debt. Let the bank foreclose on her. I will be on a beach with a margarita before she even realizes I am gone." The silence that fell over my front yard was heavier than the grave. It was the silence of a community realizing they had been played. I looked at Tasha. She was standing alone by the refreshment table, shaking violently, her hands covering her mouth as she stared at the husband who had just admitted he was planning to abandon her to ruin. The shame on her face was absolute. "Make it stop!" Kyle screamed, his composure shattering completely. He looked up at the house at the attic window where the green light was still blinking. He realized then that it was his son. His own son had destroyed him. He turned back to me, and I saw the murder in his eyes. He didn't care about the money anymore. He didn't care about the crowd or the auction. He just wanted to hurt the woman who had humiliated him. He let out a roar of pure animal hatred and lunged at me. His hands were curled into claws reaching for my throat. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I didn't have to. From the front row of the folding chairs, 5 men stood up. They didn't move fast. They moved with the heavy, unstoppable momentum of a freight train. Big Mike was in the lead. He was 70 years old with hands like sledgehammers and a back broad enough to block out the sun. Beside him were the other members of Elijah's crew, the veterans, the mechanics, the men who had built this town's engines for 40 years. They stepped between me and Kyle, forming a wall of flannel and muscle. Big Mike caught Kyle mid-charge. He didn't hit him. He just put one massive hand on Kyle's chest and stopped him dead in his tracks. It was like watching a fly hit a windshield. Kyle bounced off Mike's palm and stumbled back, gasping for air. "You are done here, son," Mike rumbled, his voice deep and dangerous. "You take one more step toward Mam B and we won't wait for the police. We will fix you right here." Kyle stood there panting like a trapped rat, hemmed in by Big Mike and the crew. Sheriff Miller tried to step in his hand, resting nervously on his belt, looking like a man who realized he had bet on the wrong horse. "Now," Bernice Miller stammered, "let's everyone calm down. We can sort this out downtown." I looked at the sheriff with the kind of pity one reserves for a fool. Downtown, I repeated, my voice dripping with ice. You think this ends at the county jail, Miller? You are out of your jurisdiction. I didn't call the local station to handle a federal crime. I called the only people big enough to clean up a mess this dirty. I raised my arm and pointed a steady finger toward the iron gates at the end of the driveway. Right on cue, the sound of heavy engines roared to life. But it wasn't the sound of old pickup trucks. It was the precision hum of government-issued horsepower. 3 black SUVs smashed through the open gates, tires tearing up the grass Kyle had manicured for his auction. They screeched to a halt in a tactical formation, boxing in the entire driveway. Doors flew open. Men and women in body armor poured out, weapons drawn but disciplined. The letters FBI were emblazoned in yellow across their backs. Federal agents, a voice boomed over a loudspeaker. Nobody move! Hands in the air! The effect was instantaneous. The crowd of neighbors dropped to the ground or scattered, but the men in the sharp suits, the so-called car collectors Kyle had invited, didn't drop. They ran. They scrambled over the fence, abandoning their dignity and their bid paddles, desperate to put distance between themselves and the feds. They knew exactly what was happening. Kyle stood frozen, his mouth hanging open. A tall agent walked right up to him, ignoring the sheriff completely. Kyle Vance, the agent, said, his voice flat and official. You are under arrest. What is this? Kyle shrieked as they spun him around and slammed him against the hood of the red Impala. You can't do this. This is a civil matter. It is a family dispute. It is not family, I said, stepping closer as the agent clicked the cuffs onto Kyle's wrists. I told them everything, Kyle. Jordan sent them your ledgers. They aren't here for the domestic abuse. They are here for the wire fraud, the racketeering, and the $3 million you laundered through interstate banks. You are not going to county jail, son. You are going to federal prison. The agent read him his rights, but Kyle wasn't listening. He was thrashing against the metal, straining to look toward the road. I followed his gaze. At the edge of the property, a black sedan with tinted windows, the car belonging to the men Kyle owed money to, was slowly backing away. It didn't speed off. It just turned and rolled away, silent and final. Kyle saw it leave, and in that moment, the arrogance finally died. He didn't scream because he was being arrested. He screamed because he had failed. Wait! Come back! Kyle howled, his face pressed against the hot metal of the car, hood tears and snot running down his face. I can pay. I have the assets. Don't leave. He looked at me, then his eyes wide with a primal terror. He knew what that car leaving meant. It meant his protection was gone. It meant the debt was still unpaid, and he knew that in prison those men could reach him. Bernice, help me, he begged, sobbing, as the agents hauled him up. Please, Mom, don't let them take me. If I go in there, I am a dead man. They will kill me, Bernice. They will kill me. I watched him struggle, looking at the man who had threatened to kill my grandson just an hour ago. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel pity. I just felt the cold, heavy weight of justice. You made your deal with the devil, Kyle, I said softly. Now you have to pay the bill. The dust from the FBI convoy had barely settled when Tasha finally moved. She stood alone by the ruined refreshment table, looking small and pathetic in her expensive dress. The neighbors were watching her, their whispers buzzing like angry hornets. She looked at the empty driveway where her husband had just been hauled away, and then she looked at me. The reality finally hit her. Her meal ticket was gone. Her protector was gone. And she was left facing the mother she had betrayed. She ran to me. She didn't walk. She ran across the grass and threw herself at my feet, wrapping her arms around my legs, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. Mama, please, she wailed, burying her face in my skirt. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know how bad it was. He lied to me. He told me he was fixing everything. I was just trying to be a good wife. Please, Mama, don't look at me like that. I didn't bend down to hold her. I didn't stroke her hair. I reached down, grabbed her shoulders with hands made strong by 40 years of hard labor, and peeled her off me. I stepped back, putting 3 feet of cold distance between us. Get up, Tasha, I said, my voice hard enough to crack stone. Do not kneel in the dirt. Stand up and look at your son. Jordan was standing by the garage door holding the laptop that had saved us. His cheek was swollen purple and angry where his father had struck him. Tasha looked at him, then tried to look away, shame flooding her face. But I wouldn't let her. I grabbed her chin and forced her to look at the bruise. "You say you were trying to be a good wife?" I asked, my voice rising, so everyone in the yard could hear. "What about being a good mother? You stood right there in that garage. You watched that man backhand your child. You watched him knock his own flesh and blood to the concrete, and you did nothing. You didn't scream, you didn't fight, you didn't even move. You chose your fear of that man over the safety of your child. And that is something I cannot forgive." Tasha sobbed, her hands covering her face. "Mama, please, I have nowhere to go. The house. The bank took the house. I don't have any money. He took everything. Let me come home. I will be better. I promise." I looked at my daughter. I saw the fear in her eyes, but I also saw the weakness that had allowed a monster to almost destroy us. If I let her back in now, she would never learn. She would never change. I looked at Samuel, who was standing quietly with his briefcase. I nodded to him. He stepped forward, pulling a document and a pen from his jacket. "Tasha," I said, pointing to the paper, "you are going to sign this, right now. It grants temporary full guardianship of Jordan to Samuel until the courts settle this mess. You are not fit to raise him right now. You surrendered that right when you let him bleed on the floor." She stared at me, shocked. "But Mama—" "Sign it," I commanded. She signed, her hand trembling. Samuel took the paper and moved to stand beside Jordan, placing a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. And as for a place to stay, I continued, pointing a finger toward the open gate. "You are young. You are healthy. And for the first time in your life, you are going to have to work for your supper. You are not staying here, Tasha. I am not raising a 40-year-old child. Get out. Go find a job. Wash dishes, scrub floors, I don't care. But go learn what it costs to survive in this world without a man to hide behind. Don't come back until you have earned the right to call yourself a mother." 6 months later, the sound of grinding metal didn't make me freeze anymore. It made me smile. I stood in the doorway of what used to be Elijah's secret sanctuary, watching a dozen teenagers in blue coveralls learn how to rebuild a transmission. The sign above the bay doors read, "Elijah Washington Youth Automotive Center," hand-painted by Big Mike himself. It wasn't a museum for dusty cars anymore. It was a classroom, a place where kids who didn't fit in at school could learn a trade that would feed them for life. That was Elijah's real dream. He never cared about hoarding wealth. He cared about passing on knowledge. I had kept the red Impala. I couldn't part with it because every time I sat in the driver's seat I could still smell his aftershave. But the Shelby and the Charger were gone. I sold them at auction for $1.4 million. The money didn't go into a new house or fancy clothes. It went straight into a trust fund for Jordan. He would never have to worry about tuition or rent or blackmail ever again. He was safe and he was thriving. He spent his weekends here teaching the younger kids about diagnostics and computer systems. He wasn't just the quiet boy with the laptop anymore. He was a leader. Tasha was changing too. It was a slow, painful process, like watching a bone knit back together. She was living in a small studio apartment on the other side of town and got a job as a cashier at the grocery store. No more designer dresses, no more expensive manicures. She came over for Sunday dinner now, but she didn't expect to be served. She helped peel potatoes, she washed the dishes, she was quiet and humble. Last week she brought Jordan a sketchbook she had bought with her own tips. It wasn't much, but it was the first thing she had paid for with honest money in a decade. She was finally learning that respect isn't inherited, it is earned. I was in the kitchen wiping down the counter after the boys had left for the day when the landline rang. It was a collect call from the Federal Correctional Institution. The automated voice was robotic and cold, asking if I would accept a call from inmate 8940 Kyle Vance. I stared at the phone, knowing exactly what he wanted. His lawyer had been calling my voicemail for weeks, saying Kyle was in protective custody because of his debts to the cartel. He needed money for the commissary. He needed money for protection. He was desperate and begging. I picked up the receiver, but I didn't say hello. I didn't ask how he was. I just set the phone down on the counter, face up. I let him listen to the silence of my peaceful paid-off home. I let him listen to the birds singing in the yard he tried to steal. "Bernice, are you there, please? I need help." His tinny voice squawked from the handset. I watched the second hand on the wall clock tick. 1, 2, 3. Then I picked up the receiver and gently placed it back in the cradle, severing the connection. I dialed the code to block the number permanently. He made his bed. Now he could sleep in it. The hose water sparkled in the Sunday afternoon sun, creating small rainbows in the mist. We were out in the driveway, just the two of us washing the red Impala. It was a ritual Elijah loved more than church. He used to say, "You respect the machine, and the machine respects you back." Jordan was down on his knees, scrubbing the white wall tires with a stiff brush, his tongue poking out the corner of his mouth in concentration. He looked so different now. The bruises from his father had faded, replaced by a quiet confidence that made him seem 3 inches taller. He wasn't the scared boy hiding in the attic anymore. He was the young man who had brought down a criminal empire with a laptop and some grit. I wrung out the chamois cloth and wiped down the long, sleek hood. The red paint was deep enough to drown in. "You missed a spot on the rim," I said, pointing with a wet finger. Jordan grinned up at me. "I didn't miss it, Grandma. I was saving the best for last." I laughed, a sound that felt good and loose in my chest. It had been a long time since laughter came easy. We finished in silence, the only sounds the splash of water and the distant church bells ringing across the valley. When the car was dry and shining like a ruby, I reached into my apron pocket. The metal was warm against my skin. "Jordan," I said, "come here." He stood up, wiping his soapy hands on his jeans. "What is it?" I took his hand and pressed the heavy iron key into his palm. "The key to the Impala, the key to the legacy. This isn't my car," I said, closing his fingers over it. "Elijah didn't build this for me to drive to bingo. He built it for the man who would take care of this family." Jordan looked at the key, then at me, his eyes wide. "Grandma? I can't. I don't even have my license yet." "You will get it," I said firmly. "Until then, we practice in the driveway. You earned this seat, baby. You stood up when everyone else sat down. You took a hit to protect your grandmother. That makes you the man of this house now." He didn't argue. He didn't cry. He just nodded, a solemn acceptance of the weight I was placing on his shoulders. He walked around to the driver's side and opened the door. I slid into the passenger seat. He put the key in the ignition and turned it. The V8 engine roared to life, a deep, throaty rumble that shook the pavement. It sounded like Elijah clearing his throat. We pulled out of the driveway, the engine purring, the sunlight flashing off the hood. We drove past the empty spot where Kyle's rental tent had stood. We drove past the gate where Tasha had walked away in shame. We drove toward the horizon, leaving the ghosts behind us. People say I was too hard. They say you don't send family to prison. They say you don't kick your own daughter out on the street. But they don't know what it takes to hold a legacy together when the wolves are at the door. I chose to be ruthless to protect the truth. I chose justice over blood. That is how Washington women love. We love with a hammer in one hand and a Bible in the other. So that is my story. I did what I had to do to save my grandson and honor my husband. Now I want to hear from you. If you found out your son-in-law was stealing your life's work, would you have the courage to send him to jail, or would you let him get away with it for the sake of peace? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more stories like mine. The most profound lesson from this ordeal is that true love is not passive. It is a fierce protective force. For too long I believed that keeping the peace meant enduring disrespect, but Elijah showed me that silence can be a strategic weapon, not a surrender. We often underestimate the quiet builders in our lives, the husband turning wrenches in the dark, the grandson typing on a laptop, forgetting that they are often constructing our safety nets. Furthermore, this journey taught me that family is defined by loyalty, not bloodline. While my daughter chose fear and greed, my grandson chose integrity. It is a stark reminder to never let anyone mistake your age for weakness or your kindness for naivety. Sometimes the most loving thing a matriarch can do is allow her children to face the harsh consequences of their actions, because a legacy worth having is one that is protected with both a prayer and a fist. If this story inspired you to stand up for your own legacy, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with a strong woman in your life who needs to hear it.